Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we're diving into an interesting and often overlooked topic, the Muslim community in Salvador, Brazil. Salvador, known for its vibrant Afro-Brazilian culture and colonial history, is also home to a small but significant Muslim population. In this video, we'll explore the rich history of Islam in Salvador, look at some demographic data, peek into the daily lives of Muslims in the city, discuss the challenges they face, and examine the state of Islamophobia in the area. We'll start by tracing Islam's roots in Salvador back to the colonial era, then move on to current population estimates and the breakdown between Sunni and Shia Muslims. We'll explore how Muslims in Salvador go about their daily lives, where they tend to live, and what kind of community they've built. We'll also tackle the hurdles they face as a religious minority. Finally, we'll address the sensitive but important topic of Islamophobia in Salvador. This journey through Salvador's Islamic community will give us a unique perspective on religious diversity in Brazil and how Islam fits into the cultural mosaic of this fascinating city. Let's get started. Okay, let's start with the history of Islam in Salvador. It's a fascinating story that's often overlooked in Brazilian history. So picture this. We're back in the 16th century, and Salvador has just been established as the first capital of colonial Brazil. The Portuguese are bringing over enslaved people from West Africa, and among them are a significant number of Muslims. We're talking about people from places like Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, and especially northern Nigeria. Many of these folks were part of highly developed Islamic societies back home. Now, here's where it gets interesting. A lot of these enslaved Muslims were actually well educated. Some could read and write in Arabic, and they brought with them a rich Islamic tradition. But of course, the Portuguese weren't too keen on letting them practice their faith openly. They forced conversions to Catholicism, but you know how it goes. People find ways to keep their beliefs alive. In Salvador, this led to a kind of underground Islamic culture. Muslims would gather in secret to pray, fast during Ramadan, and pass on their traditions to their children. There are even accounts of Qur'ans being smuggled into the country, hidden away from the authorities. One of the most fascinating aspects of this period was the emergence of Muslim-led slave rebellions. The most famous of these was the Malay Revolt in 1835. It was primarily organized by Muslim slaves in Salvador, and it scared the living daylights out of the Portuguese rulers. The rebels had planned this huge uprising, using Arabic to communicate secretly. Although the revolt was ultimately crushed, it left a lasting impact on Salvador's history and highlighted the strength of the Muslim community. After the abolition of slavery in 1888, the Muslim population in Salvador began to decline. Many former slaves left the city, and without new arrivals from Africa, Islamic practices started to fade. But they didn't disappear entirely. Some elements of Islamic culture became integrated into Afro-Brazilian religions like candomblé. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we see a new chapter in Salvador's Islamic history. Starting in the 1950s and 60s, there was a new wave of Muslim immigrants, this time mostly from Lebanon and Syria. These folks were mainly looking for economic opportunities, and they brought with them a revitalized practice of Islam. In the 1970s, Salvador saw its first modern mosque built. This marked a turning point for the Muslim community, giving them a visible presence in the city for the first time in centuries. Since then, the community has been slowly growing, with both immigrants and local converts joining its ranks. It's really a story of resilience, you know? From those early days of secret prayers and hidden Qur'ans to today's open practice of Islam, the Muslim community in Salvador has come a long way. And in a way, it's come full circle. The descendants of those early African Muslims might be long gone, but their legacy lives on in the vibrant Islamic community that exists in Salvador today. All right, let's dive into the numbers and demographics of Muslims in Salvador. I'll be upfront with you, though. Getting precise figures for Salvador specifically is a bit tricky, so we'll have to work with some estimates and extrapolations from broader data. So, Brazil as a whole has a relatively small Muslim population. According to the most recent official census data I have access to, which is from 2010, there were about 35,000 Muslims in the entire country. Now that number's likely grown since then, with some unofficial estimates putting it closer to 1 to 1.5 million Muslims in Brazil today. But let's keep in mind that these are rough estimates. When it comes to Salvador specifically, it's even harder to pin down exact numbers. Salvador is the capital of Bahia state, which historically has had a significant Muslim presence due to its role in the slave trade. However, in modern times, the Muslim population in Salvador is still relatively small. Based on the general distribution of Muslims in Brazil and Salvador's population size, we might estimate that there are somewhere between 1,000 to 5,000 Muslims in Salvador. But I want to stress that this is a very rough estimate. The actual number could be lower or higher. Now, when it comes to the split between Sunni and Shia Muslims, again, we don't have Salvador-specific data, but we can look at the overall trend in Brazil. The vast majority of Muslims in Brazil, probably around 90% or more, are Sunni. This is largely due to the fact that most Muslim immigrants to Brazil came from Sunni-majority countries like Lebanon and Syria. So if we apply this ratio to Salvador, we might expect something like 90 to 95% Sunni Muslims, 5 to 10% Shia Muslims. But remember, in a small community, these percentages can be heavily influenced by just a few families or individuals. It's also worth noting that Salvador, like many Brazilian cities, has seen some growth in its Muslim population through conversion. This includes both people of African descent reconnecting with the Islamic heritage of their ancestors, and Brazilians of other backgrounds who have chosen to embrace Islam. Another important point is that the Muslim community in Salvador, while small, is diverse. You've got descendants of earlier Arab immigrants, more recent immigrants from various countries, and local converts. This diversity can make it even trickier to get accurate demographic breakdowns. Now, I've got to level with you. All these numbers I'm giving you are educated guesses based on broader trends. The reality is that we don't have super accurate, up-to-date statistics on the Muslim population in Salvador. If you're making a video about this, it might be worth reaching out to local Islamic centers or mosques in Salvador. They might have more accurate, on-the-ground data about their community. Also, it's important to note that the size of a religious community doesn't necessarily reflect its cultural impact or importance. Even though the Muslim population in Salvador is small, it has a rich history and plays a significant role in the city's cultural tapestry. All right, let's dive into the daily lives of Muslims in Salvador. This is where things get really interesting because it's all about how people actually live and practice their faith in the context of this vibrant Brazilian city. So most Muslims in Salvador are going about their daily lives just like anyone else. They're working various jobs, running businesses, studying at schools and universities, and participating in the local community. You'll find Muslims in all sorts of professions: doctors, teachers, shopkeepers, you name it. Now, when it comes to religious practices, the center of Muslim life in Salvador is the local mosque. There's at least one main mosque in the city, and it serves as both a place of worship and a community center. On Fridays, you'll see a larger turnout for Jumu'ah prayers. During Ramadan, the mosque becomes even more active, with people gathering for iftar meals to break their fast together. Many Muslims in Salvador try to pray 5 times a day as prescribed in Islam. This can be a bit challenging in a predominantly Catholic society, but many workplaces and schools are becoming more accommodating. Some Muslims might duck into a quiet corner or an empty room to offer their prayers during work or school hours. When it comes to food, finding halal options can be a bit tricky in Salvador. It's not like in some bigger cities where you might find lots of halal restaurants. So, many Muslims in Salvador end up cooking at home a lot. There are a few specialty stores that import halal meats and other products, and some Muslims have even started small businesses to cater to this need. As for where Muslims live in Salvador, they're pretty much spread throughout the city. However, you might find slightly higher concentrations in central areas or neighborhoods with more immigrant populations. There isn't really a specific Muslim quarter like you might find in some other cities around the world. One interesting aspect of Muslim life in Salvador is how it intersects with the city's famous Afro-Brazilian culture. Some Muslims, especially those with African heritage, find ways to participate in cultural events and traditions while still adhering to their Islamic principles. It's a unique blend you won't find in many other places. Education is super important in the Muslim community. Many families put a strong emphasis on both secular and religious education. Some send their kids to Islamic weekend schools to learn about their faith and to study Arabic. Community outreach is also a big part of Muslim life in Salvador. Many Muslims are actively involved in interfaith dialogues and charity work. This helps to build bridges with other communities and also addresses some of the misconceptions about Islam. During major Islamic holidays like Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha, the community really comes alive. These are times for big gatherings, special meals, and celebrations. It's also when you're most likely to see visible signs of the Muslim community in Salvador, with people dressed in traditional clothes heading to the mosque or to community events. For young Muslims in Salvador, there's often a balancing act between maintaining their Islamic identity and integrating into the broader Brazilian youth culture. Many find creative ways to do this, participating in local sports, music, and art scenes, while still staying true to their faith. It's worth noting that the experience can vary quite a bit from person to person. Some Muslims in Salvador are very strict in their practice, while others take a more relaxed approach. You've got everything from recent immigrants who are still adjusting to Brazilian culture to born and raised Salvadorans who've embraced Islam. All right, let's get into the challenges faced by the Muslim population in Salvador. Like any minority community, they've got their share of issues to deal with. First off, there's the challenge of maintaining religious practices in a predominantly Catholic society. Salvador, like much of Brazil, operates on a calendar and cultural rhythm that's heavily influenced by Catholicism. This can make it tricky for Muslims to observe their own religious holidays or prayer times. For instance, during Ramadan, Muslims fasting might have to navigate social situations where eating and drinking during the day is the norm. Finding appropriate spaces for prayer can be a hurdle too. While there's at least one mosque in Salvador, it might not be conveniently located for everyone. Muslims working or studying might struggle to find quiet, clean spaces to offer their daily prayers. Then there's the food situation. Halal options are pretty limited in Salvador. Most restaurants don't cater to halal dietary requirements, and even finding halal meat for cooking at home can be a challenge. Some Muslims might have to resort to a vegetarian diet when eating out, or carefully scrutinize food labels when shopping. Education is another area where challenges pop up. Muslim parents might find it difficult to find schools that accommodate their religious practices or teach about Islam in a respectful, accurate way. Some families opt for homeschooling or supplementary Islamic education, but this can be time-consuming and resource-intensive. There's also the issue of representation and visibility. Muslims in Salvador often find themselves having to explain their faith and practices to others. This can be exhausting, especially when faced with misconceptions or stereotypes about Islam that are prevalent in media. Cultural integration can be a delicate balance. Younger Muslims in particular might struggle with fitting in with their peers while maintaining their Islamic identity. This could mean navigating social situations involving alcohol or dealing with dating norms that conflict with Islamic principles. For Muslim women who choose to wear hijab, there can be additional challenges. They might face discrimination in job markets or curious, and sometimes intrusive, questions about their choice of dress. Language can be a barrier for some members of the community, especially recent immigrants. While many Muslims in Salvador are native Portuguese speakers, those who aren't might struggle with accessing services or fully participating in civic life. There's also the economic aspect. Some Muslims might face discrimination in employment or business opportunities due to their faith. This can be particularly challenging for visible Muslims or those with obviously Islamic names. Political representation is another issue. The Muslim community in Salvador is small, which can make it difficult for their concerns to be heard and addressed at the local government level. Lastly, there's the challenge of community cohesion. With a relatively small and diverse Muslim population, it can be hard to maintain a sense of unity and provide comprehensive community services. Different ethnic or national groups within the Muslim community might have their own cultural practices, which can sometimes lead to internal divisions. It's important to note that while these challenges exist, many Muslims in Salvador have found ways to overcome them. They've built support networks, engaged in interfaith dialogue, and work to educate their fellow citizens about Islam. Many report positive experiences of acceptance and curiosity from their non-Muslim neighbors. All right, let's tackle the fifth part, the question of Islamophobia in Salvador. This is a sensitive topic, and it's important to approach it with nuance. First off, it's worth noting that Brazil, in general, has a reputation for being relatively tolerant when it comes to religious diversity. This holds true for Salvador as well. The city's history of cultural mixing and its Afro-Brazilian heritage have contributed to a generally accepting atmosphere. However, that doesn't mean Islamophobia is completely absent. In Salvador, Islamophobia tends to be more subtle than overt. It often manifests as misunderstanding or ignorance rather than outright hostility. Many people in Salvador simply don't know much about Islam, which can lead to misconceptions and stereotypes. There aren't any prominent organized anti-Islamic movements or groups in Salvador that I'm aware of. The kind of institutionalized Islamophobia you might see in some other parts of the world isn't really a thing here. However, individual Muslims might occasionally encounter prejudice or discrimination. Some of the Islamophobia that does exist often stems from global events and media portrayals rather than local issues. International news about terrorism or conflicts in the Middle East can sometimes lead to negative perceptions of Muslims, even in a place like Salvador where the Muslim community is small and well integrated. Muslim women who wear hijab might face more instances of discrimination or curious stares. This isn't always hostile. Sometimes it's just people who aren't used to seeing hijabs, but it can be uncomfortable nonetheless. In schools and workplaces, Muslims might encounter ignorance about their practices. For example, there might be a lack of understanding about the need for prayer spaces or time off for religious holidays. This isn't necessarily Islamophobia, but it can make life more challenging for Muslims. It's also worth mentioning that sometimes anti-immigrant sentiment can overlap with Islamophobia, particularly towards more recent Muslim immigrants. However, this isn't a widespread or organized phenomenon in Salvador. On the flip side, there are active efforts to combat Islamophobia and promote understanding. Muslim community leaders in Salvador often engage in interfaith dialogue and community outreach. They organize events to educate the public about Islam and participate in local cultural activities. Many non-Muslim Salvadorans are curious about Islam and eager to learn. There's often a genuine interest in understanding Muslim culture and practices, which helps to counteract potential Islamophobia. The local government in Salvador, while not perfect, generally tries to promote religious tolerance. They've worked with the Muslim community on various initiatives and have been responsive to concerns when they've been raised. It's also important to note that experiences can vary widely among individual Muslims in Salvador. Some might report never facing any significant issues, while others might have encountered more frequent problems. In terms of the struggle against Islamophobia, it's largely focused on education and awareness. Muslim organizations in Salvador work to provide accurate information about Islam, participate in community events, and build relationships with other religious and cultural groups. To sum it up, while Islamophobia isn't a major organized force in Salvador, it does exist in more subtle forms. The Muslim community faces challenges related to misunderstanding and stereotypes rather than outright hostility. The overall atmosphere is one of tolerance, but there's still work to be done in terms of education and awareness. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the Muslim community of Salvador. Pretty fascinating stuff, right? From the rich history dating back to colonial times to the vibrant, diverse community we see today, it's clear that Islam is an important thread in Salvador's cultural tapestry. We've covered a lot of ground here. The early days of Islam in the city, the current demographics, daily life for Muslims in Salvador, the challenges they face, and even touched on the sensitive topic of Islamophobia. It's a complex picture, but one that adds so much depth to our understanding of this amazing city. I hope this video has given you a new perspective on Salvador and maybe sparked your curiosity to learn more about the diverse communities that make up Brazil. There's always more to explore when it comes to culture, religion, and how different groups coexist in our cities. If you found this video interesting or learned something new, why not hit that subscribe button? I'm always diving into unique aspects of culture and society, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Got any thoughts or experiences related to what we've discussed? Maybe you've visited Salvador or have some insights about religious minorities in your own city. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you and get a conversation going. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.